My hands were shaking so badly, I had to set the flashlight down on the stone floor to keep the beam steady. 3:47 in the morning. The basilica completely dark except for that single circle of white light falling across the base of the tomb. And beside it, pressed against the marble, perfectly still, something that made my breath stop in my chest like a fist had closed around my lungs. I had been a friar for 22 years at that point. I had spent 1,000 nights in that basilica. I knew every sound the building made when the temperature dropped after midnight, every creak of the wooden choir stalls, every echo that traveled down from the apse when the wind moved through the bell tower. I knew all of it, which is exactly why I knew that what I was looking at could not be there. I reached for the flashlight. My fingers closed around it. And then I heard it. That is where I have to stop, because what I heard is connected to something I found 7 years later, sealed inside a small leather notebook that a 15-year-old boy had pressed into my hands on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2006, 2 days before he died. He told me not to open it until I understood why he had given it to me. For 7 years, I did not understand, and for 7 years, I carried it. Until that night at 3:47, when everything clicked into place at once, and I realized that Carlo Acutis had known this moment was coming, had written it down before I ever set foot in Assisi for the first time. There are 3 things about that night I have never told anyone outside of the canonical investigation. The first is what I saw. The second is what I heard. And the third, the thing that has kept me awake more nights than I can count, is what the notebook said, in Carlo's own handwriting, dated 4 months before his death, about a friar he had not yet met, in a basilica he had never visited, on a night he had no reason to name. My name is Brother Matteo Ricci. I am 61 years old. I have served as a Franciscan friar at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Assisi for 23 years. Before my vows, I spent 11 years as a structural engineer in Milan. Concrete, load calculations, soil compression ratios, numbers were my religion. Precision was my faith. I am telling you this because it matters. It matters that when I say something could not exist, I mean it in the strict technical sense of the word. I do not say impossible lightly. And I spent 6 years trying to find another explanation for what I saw before I finally accepted there was none. For 18 years, I have stayed silent about most of this. Today, I tell it all. I was 43 years old when I took my vows. Late, I know. The brothers at the novitiate used to tease me about it. They said I had arrived with too many right angles in my head, too many load-bearing walls where there should have been open sky. They were not wrong. My relationship with faith was structural. I believed in God the way I believed in tensile strength, as a force that could be calculated, categorized, referenced in a table. The supernatural, the miraculous, the mystical, I left those for poets and the elderly. I arrived in Assisi in June 2002. My assignment was straightforward. I was the brother responsible for the basilica's structural integrity. The humidity in Umbria is brutal on medieval stone. My job was to monitor crack progression in the nave walls, measure subsidence in the foundation columns every 6 months, and maintain the thermal and humidity logs for the reliquary alcoves. Every 2 weeks, I filed a 4-page report with specific measurements: millimeters, percentages, instrument codes. I was the least romantic person in that building, and everyone knew it. The assignment that would change everything reached me not as a phone call, but as a letter, handwritten on plain white paper in the slightly formal Italian of someone who had learned to write carefully. It arrived on September 14th, 2006. I still have the envelope, postmarked Monza, stored in the canonical archive with a reference number I can recite from memory: D2006-0914R. The letter was from Antonia Salzano. She said her son Carlo had read about the Eucharistic Miracles exhibition, the website he had built, the one cataloging Eucharistic miracles from around the world, and that he wanted, very much, to visit Assisi before the leukemia made travel impossible. He had been diagnosed with M3 leukemia 4 days earlier. He was 15 years old. His mother said he was not afraid. She said he was calm. She said he wanted to see the tomb of St. Francis and the Portiuncula, and that he hoped, if it was possible, to speak with one of the brothers. I was not the one assigned to meet him. That was Brother Giacomo, who handled pilgrim visits. But on the morning of October 10th, 2006, Brother Giacomo had a severe allergic reaction to something in the sacristy. Bee sting, swollen throat, emergency clinic in Perugia. The prior looked down the list of available brothers and landed on me. I remember my exact thought. I remember thinking, I will be polite, I will be brief, and I will get back to the humidity readings in the north transept, which were already showing a 4-point deviation I did not like. That was not what happened. Carlo arrived at 10:30 in the morning with his mother and his father. He was thin in the way that illness makes a person thin. Not gaunt, not frightening, but somehow slightly distilled, as if everything unnecessary had already been quietly removed. He wore jeans and a light blue jacket. He had a small backpack. He shook my hand with both of his, which surprised me. He said, in very good Italian, with a slight British cadence that he had not quite shed despite years in the lawn, "Brother Matteo, I'm really glad it was you." I had never met him. I had not been assigned to meet him. He had no way of knowing my name. I assumed he had asked someone at the door. I let it go. We walked through the basilica for 2 hours. He asked me technical questions that I did not expect from a 15-year-old. Questions about the age of the stone, the specific provenance of the marble in the altar, the structural modifications made after the 1997 earthquake. He knew about the Morgi scale readings. He knew the date of the earthquake, September 26, 1997, and the magnitude, 6.1, and the specific damage pattern in the upper basilica. He wasn't showing off. He was genuinely interested in the precise, focused way of someone who has decided to pay attention to everything while he still can. Near the end of the visit, we sat in the small side chapel to the left of the main nave, the one with the 14th century fresco of the Annunciation that had been partially damaged and never fully restored. We sat there for perhaps 20 minutes, mostly in silence. His mother had gone to pray at the main altar. His father was outside making a phone call. It was just Carlo and me, and the incomplete fresco, and the faint smell of candle smoke. He reached into his backpack and took out a small leather notebook, dark brown, perhaps 10 centimeters by 14. The cover had a small embossed cross on the lower right corner, worn almost flat from handling. He held it out to me. "I want you to keep this," he said. I told him I could not take his personal notebook. He smiled, not the polite smile of a child being corrected, but something older, something that did not belong on a 15-year-old's face. "It is not mine anymore," he said. "Some of it I wrote for you. You'll know when to open it. Keep it until then." I did not know what to say. I took the notebook. I put it in the pocket of my habit. I told myself I would return it to his mother before they left. I did not. Something stopped me. Some instinct I could not name kept my hand in my pocket when I said goodbye to Antonia Salzano in the courtyard at 12:30. Carlo turned back once from the car, looked directly at me, and nodded, as if I had made the right decision. He died 2 days later, October 12th, 2006, St. Gerardo Hospital, Monza. Fulminant M3 leukemia. He was 15 years, 5 months, and 9 days old. I put the notebook in the locked drawer of my desk in the structural office, and I did not open it. I cannot fully explain why. It felt from the first day like a document with a specific time attached to it, the way a legal instrument has an effective date. Open it too soon and it would mean nothing. There was something I had to understand first. I did not know what, but the drawer stayed locked. That was the beginning of the fourth thing, the question I have never answered to my own full satisfaction. How did Carlo know at 10:30 on October 10th that the brother waiting for him would be me? The night that broke everything was January 17th, 2017. I know the date because I entered it immediately in the structural logbook. Not because anything structural had occurred, but because the logbook was the only record I kept with any regularity, and I needed to write it down somewhere before I convinced myself I had imagined it. I was on night duty. In the Franciscan community at Assisi, night duty rotates among the brothers in residence. The duty brother walks the basilica at midnight and again at 4 in the morning, checking locks, checking candles, checking that the climate control is functioning within the acceptable parameters for the reliquary alcoves. The acceptable range for temperature in those alcoves is between 16 and 18 degrees Celsius, humidity between 45 and 55%. I had written those parameters myself in 2004, based on conservation standards from the Opificio delle Pietre Dure in Florence. At midnight, the readings were normal. Temperature, 17.2 Celsius. Humidity, 48.6%. I logged them, checked the candles, checked the locks, went back to the duty room. At 3:37 in the morning, I know the exact time because I checked my watch when the sound woke me, I heard something from the direction of the basilica. A tone. Not a voice, not a creak or a groan of the building. I knew all of those. This was a sustained low tone, somewhere between what a cello produces at its lowest register and the resonance frequency of a long stone corridor. I had measured that frequency once for a report on acoustic anomalies. 41 hertz. This was close to that, but slightly higher, perhaps 44 hertz. Clear, sustained, unwavering. I was a structural engineer before I was a friar. My first instinct was seismic. A micro tremor at 44 hertz with enough amplitude to produce audible resonance in the nave would register on the INGV network, the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology. I made a mental note to check the online portal in the morning. I put on my sandals and went to look. The basilica was dark. I switched on my flashlight, a small LED model, 220 lumens, battery checked that afternoon, and walked the central nave toward the area of Carlo's tomb. His body had been transferred to Assisi in January 2016, 11 months before this night. The tomb was in a side chapel, off the right transept, set into the floor, covered by a glass panel through which the body was visible, dressed in jeans and a white shirt, exactly as it had been placed at the beatification process examination. I reached the door of the chapel. The tone had stopped. The basilica was completely silent. I pushed the door open and swept the flashlight beam across the room. Something was beside the tomb. At first, my brain tried to resolve it as a person, a pilgrim who had stayed after closing, somehow locked inside. The basilica had been secured at 10:45 p.m. I had checked the lock on this chapel door myself at midnight. The chapel had no other entrance. But the shape was wrong for a person standing. It was close to the floor, pressed against the base of the marble surround of the tomb's glass panel. White. Roughly the dimensions of a large book lying flat, perhaps 30 centimeters by 20, slightly raised at the center, as if folded or stacked. I crossed the chapel in 8 steps. I counted because counting is what my brain does when it is trying to stay functional. I crouched down. I brought the flashlight to within 40 centimeters of the object. White roses, 11 of them, arranged with the stems aligned, not scattered, arranged with precision, the heads fanned in a specific semicircle against the base of the tomb, the petals intact, the stems cut cleanly at an angle. Fresh. The kind of fresh that means within the last hour, because the outer petals had not even begun to lose their tension. I pressed one petal between my thumb and index finger. Cool. Slightly damp with condensation from the temperature differential between the chapel and wherever they had come from. 11 white roses. Inside a locked chapel. In a locked basilica. At 3:47 in the morning. I stood up. I walked back to the chapel door and examined the lock from both sides. No damage. No sign of forced entry. I walked the perimeter of the chapel, 16 meters total, and checked every wall. No hidden doors, No ventilation shaft large enough to pass a book through, let alone 11 long-stemmed roses. The closest external wall had a single high window, 40 centimeters wide by 60 centimeters tall, 170 centimeters above floor level, with the original iron grating intact and its securing bolts showing no signs of recent disturbance. I checked the bolt heads with the flashlight. The oxidation layer was unbroken on every one. I went back to the roses. I counted them again. 11. I photographed them with my phone. The timestamp on those photographs reads 3 hours, 51 minutes, and 22 seconds, January 17th, 2017. Then I noticed something I had missed in the first sweep. Beneath the flowers, barely visible under the edge of the outermost stems, was a small folded card, white. I lifted the stems carefully, enough to extract the card without disturbing the arrangement. I unfolded it. Written on it, in Italian, in a hand I did not recognize, Porta la croce con gioia. Il cielo è vicino. Carry the cross with joy. Heaven is near. That was a phrase I had heard before. Not read, heard. Spoken aloud in a slightly British cadenced Italian, in a small side chapel with an incomplete 14th century fresco. On October 10th, 2006, Carlo had said it to me as I admired the damaged portion of the painting. He had said it so quietly, I had almost taken it as a thought rather than speech. I set the card down. I sat on the stone floor of the chapel. My flashlight was in my lap, and the beam was pointing at the ceiling. And I sat there for what my watch later told me was 11 minutes, not moving, not praying in any formal sense, simply understanding that something had happened in this room, that my engineering background and my 22 years of religious life had left me completely unequipped to categorize. The INGV seismic portal, when I checked it the next morning at 6:15, showed no recorded activity in the Assisi region for the entire night of January 16th, 17th, 2017. 0 events above magnitude 0.5. The tone I had heard had no seismic explanation. The Basilica's climate log for that night, printed from the automated monitoring system model Carol PC05, installed 2014, calibrated October 2016, showed the following for the side chapel. At midnight, 17.2 degrees Celsius, 48.6% humidity. At 4 a.m., when the automated read cycled again, 16.9 degrees Celsius, 49.1% humidity. A drop of 0.3 degrees over 4 hours, entirely consistent with the normal nocturnal curve. The chapel had been, climatically, completely undisturbed. 11 fresh white roses, in a room that had shown no thermal disturbance, no seismic activity, no breach of its locks or walls, had appeared sometime between midnight and 3:51 in the morning. If what the monitoring system said was true, what lay on the floor of that chapel should not have been possible. If what you've just heard has stirred something in you, if you're feeling that particular stillness that comes when something breaks the edges of the explainable, I want to give you something before I go on. I prepared a novena to Carlo Acutis, completely free, 9 days of prayer drawn from his own words and the mysteries he loved. It's there for whoever needs it, for the person you're carrying in your heart right now, for the intention you haven't been able to put down. It's in the description, the first link, right below this video. Download it, pray it over 9 days, and pray it knowing that what happened in that chapel that January night was only the beginning. Because what I found when I began investigating the roses, what a botanist told me 72 hours later, made the locked door the least impossible part of the story. I spent the morning of January 17th making decisions about what to do with what I had found. My first instinct, the engineer's instinct, was documentation. I had the photographs. I needed physical evidence from the roses themselves before anyone else entered the chapel. I called Brother Friar at 7 a.m. I told him there was an anomaly in the chapel, and I needed 2 things: that the chapel remain locked until I had completed an assessment, and that I be permitted to contact an external specialist. He said yes to both, in the slightly resigned tone of a man who has learned that Brother Matteo's anomalies are usually structural and always documented in excessive detail. At 9:15, I called Dr. Federica Monti, a botanical scientist at the University of Perugia, with whom I had a professional relationship from an earlier project involving the preservation of plant material in medieval frescoes. I described what I had found without mentioning the locked room. I asked whether she could examine the specimens and provide an assessment of their approximate cut time. She arrived at 11:40. She examined the roses for 37 minutes. She used a small lighted magnifier, a portable humidity probe, model Testo 610, reading confirmed against the chapel's fixed sensor, and a reference card for Rosa Hybrida classification. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at me. "These were cut between 2 and 4 a.m. this morning," she said. "The cell wall integrity at the stem cross-section is consistent with a maximum post-harvest interval of 6 to 8 hours. The condensation pattern on the outer petals suggests they were transported from a cooler environment, refrigerated storage, perhaps 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, to this space within the last 2 to 3 hours." She paused. "Where were they sourced?" I told her I did not know. She looked at me for a long moment. "These are Rosa iceberg, high-quality cultivar, winter forcing under greenhouse conditions. The nearest commercial greenhouse producing this cultivar that I know of is outside Foligno, 40 minutes from here by car. They would not be delivering it 2 in the morning." I asked her to write up her assessment. She did, on University of Perugia letterhead, dated January 17th, 2017. Document reference in the Canonical Archive, E2170117-B. Her conclusion: the specimens were cut 4 to 6 hours before her examination at 11:40 a.m., placing the cut time between 5:40 a.m. and 7:40 a.m. at the earliest. And yet the automated climate log showed no temperature change consistent with someone carrying warm atmosphere roses into the 16-degree chapel. And my photographs were time-stamped 3:51 a.m. The botanical evidence pushed the cut time forward. My photographs pushed the discovery time backward. The two facts, together, did not fit in the same timeline. Dr. Monti, when I explained the full context 2 weeks later, looked at her own report for a long time before saying quietly, "I don't know what to tell you, Brother Matteo. The data doesn't resolve." I went back to the photographs. I had taken 11 in total, from 4 different angles. In photograph number 7, taken from the northwest corner of the chapel at a slight downward angle to capture the full arrangement, there was something I had not noticed on the small phone screen at 3:51 a.m. In the upper right corner of the frame, at the base of the wall behind the tomb, there was a faint luminosity. Not the flashlight's beam, which was coming from the opposite direction. Not a reflection. I had checked the walls during my perimeter sweep. There was nothing reflective at that height. A soft, diffuse glow, approximately 40 centimeters in diameter, slightly brighter at the center. I sent the photograph to a colleague in Milan, Dr. Sergio Brambilla, a physicist who specialized in optical phenomena and who had consulted on several basilica illumination assessments. He examined it for 4 days. His email received January 23, 2017 at 14:22. The luminosity in the upper right quadrant is not consistent with any light source visible in the frame. It is not lens flare. The geometry is wrong. It is not a reflection artifact from the LED flashlight. The spectral temperature of the glow appears cooler than your flashlight's 5700K output. I can tell you what it is not. I cannot tell you what it is. A glow with a spectral temperature inconsistent with any light source in the room, in a locked chapel, beside fresh roses that arrived before the time the botanical evidence said they could have been cut. And that was when the problem stopped being about the roses. I need to go back 3 years, because what I found in the weeks following January 17th would have meant nothing without something that happened in 2014, something I had filed under the heading of coincidence and left there. Block 4 in my personal record of the impossible. I am taking you there now because without it, the rest makes no sense. In October 2014, 8 years after Carlo's death, The process for his beatification was formally opened at the diocesan level in Milan. I knew this because I had been contacted by the postulator's office in September of that year, a letter requesting that any friars who had met Carlo in person submit a written account of their interaction. I wrote 4 pages. Reference
D20140923-A in the Milan Diocesan Archive. In it, I described the visit of October 10th, 2006, the 2 hours walking the basilica, the chapel with the incomplete fresco, the notebook he had given me, which I still had not opened.
The postulator's office wrote back in November. They thanked me. They asked one follow-up question. Had Carlo said anything to me during the visit that I considered unusual, or that I could not explain by ordinary means? I wrote back, yes. I told them about the greeting. I'm really glad it was you, before I had introduced myself. I told them about his knowledge of the earthquake measurements. And I told them about something I had not included in the first account, because I could not place it in any ordinary category. As we had stood before the glass panel of a reliquary in the south aisle, a first-century oil lamp attributed to the early Christian community, Carlo had stopped walking. He had turned to me. He had said in the same quiet tone that one day this basilica would be his home. I had taken it as a child's fancy, a wish to be associated with the place he loved. I had said something non-committal, like St. Francis would be honored. Carlo had smiled and said, I mean after. He did not elaborate. I did not ask. In January 2016, his body was transferred to the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Assisi, his home. He had said after. I had heard it as sentiment. He had meant it with a specificity I had not been ready to receive. The postulator's office noted my follow-up letter. In March 2015, I received a phone call from a Father Daniele Mancini in Rome, member of the Theological Commission reviewing the cause. He asked me a question I was not expecting. Had Carlo given me anything during the visit? Anything physical? I told him about the notebook, the one I had not opened. There was a pause on the line. Then Father Mancini said, very carefully, Brother Matteo, I think you should keep it closed a little longer. But I also think you should know that you are not the only person Carlo gave something to with the instruction to wait. He would not tell me who else. He would not tell me what they had received. But that single sentence planted something that would not leave me alone. There were other objects, other waiting periods, other specific instructions from a 15-year-old boy who apparently knew that the recipients would need time to understand why they were holding what he had given them. I went back to the locked drawer that evening. I held the notebook for 20 minutes. The cover embossed cross, worn almost flat. 10 centimeters by 14. 143 grams. I had weighed it once, in 2009, for no reason I could articulate, except that weighing things made me feel I understood them. I put it back. I locked the drawer. And I began to do what I should have done years earlier. I began to research Carlo Acutis in earnest. What I found in the following months reorganized everything. And the more I found, the more I understood why Carlo had spent the last years of his short life building what he had built. The website, the Eucharistic Miracles of the World exhibition, had cataloged, as of 2015, 163 documented Eucharistic miracles from 42 countries. Carlo had not simply listed them, he had cross-referenced them, dated them, located them with GPS coordinates, some accurate to within 100 meters. He had included the names of the scientific investigators, the dates of laboratory analyses, the specific findings, blood type AB, consistent across multiple geographically unrelated events, cardiac muscle tissue in the 8th to 12th week of fetal development. He had done this starting at age 11. He did it the way I would have done a load-bearing calculation, methodically, with sources, with no tolerance for imprecision. He was 11. He was building what was, in effect, a scientific database of the supernatural. And the rigor of it, the actual rigor, not the enthusiasm of a pious child, but the discipline of someone who understood that evidence matters, that dates and names and laboratory results are the difference between testimony and proof. That rigor was what had made his mother write to me in the first place. Carlo had told Antonia that Assisi was important, that there was a brother there who worked with numbers, who would understand evidence better than faith, that she should write. I found this out in March 2015 when I finally called Antonia Salzano directly. She was gracious and precise, and she had clearly told the story of her son many hundreds of times without it becoming less real to her. She confirmed the letter. She said Carlo had told her, in late August 2006, 6 weeks before his diagnosis, that she should write to a brother in Assisi who dealt with structural things. He had given her my name. My name. In August. Before the letter. Before the visit. My name was not on the Basilica's public contact information. The public contact was the Prior's office. I was listed internally as the structural maintenance officer, in a directory accessible only to Franciscan provincial administration. Carlo, at 15, in August 2006, had given his mother the name of a friar he had no ordinary means of knowing. The canonical investigation into this specific detail would eventually occupy 4 months of inquiry and fill 67 pages. The conclusion, in the formal Latin of the Theological Commission, nullum medium ordinarium potuit adhiberi. No ordinary means could have been employed. There was a second thing Antonia told me that afternoon on the phone. She said that on the morning of October 10th, 2006, the morning of the visit, Carlo had been unusually quiet at breakfast. She had asked whether he was feeling unwell. He had said no. He had said, "Today I give something away that I've been carrying for a while, and when he opens it, everything will be finished. The accounting will close." He said when he opens it. Not if. Not, "I hope he reads it." When. He knew I would wait. He knew I would hold it. He knew I would open it when I was ready, which meant he knew what ready looked like, which meant he knew what would happen to me between October 2006 and whenever I finally turned those pages. That was open loop number 2 beginning to close. And the closure was sharper than I expected, because it brought with it a new question that kept me awake for most of that spring. What exactly was inside that notebook? If you downloaded that novena I mentioned earlier, you already know the feeling I'm trying to describe. That sense of something being offered that you weren't quite ready to receive until the moment it was there. If you haven't found it yet, it's still there. The first link in the description, right below this video. Pray it for whoever you've been carrying in your heart through this story. And if these testimonies mean something to you, if you come back to this channel because you feel it in your chest the way I felt it in that cold chapel, this is where I keep gathering them. But what happened 3 weeks after my conversation with Antonia Salzano changed even the way I understood the roses, because that is when a second witness came forward, with data I had never shared with anyone. Her name was Sister Chiara Rossi. She was not a Franciscan. She was a Benedictine from the monastery of San Paolo in Bastia Umbra, 12 kilometers from Assisi. In April 2015, she contacted the Prior's office directly, asking whether a brother Matteo, she described me by name and by the fact that I handled structural matters, had reported any anomaly in the chapel of Carlo Acutis in the past several months. I called her the same evening I was told about her inquiry. She had seen the roses, not on January 17th. She had not been in the Basilica on January 17th. She had seen them on December 3rd, 2016, 45 days before my night of duty. She had come to the Basilica for early morning prayer, arriving at 5:40 a.m. when the doors opened, and had gone directly to Carlo's chapel. The roses were there. 11 of them. White, arranged against the base of the tomb in a semicircle, stems aligned, heads fanned. She had assumed they were a regular offering, some devotional custom she was unaware of. She had prayed for 20 minutes and left. She had said nothing to anyone for 4 months. Then, in late March 2015, let me correct the chronology. I am collapsing 2 years, because the details matter. Sister Chiara's December 2016 visit was 1 year after Carlo's body arrived in Assisi. She contacted us in April 2017, 3 months after my January night. She had heard, through a contact in the Assisi religious community, that a brother had reported an anomaly in the chapel. She came forward because she had been waiting to see whether someone else had noticed. I asked her to describe the arrangement precisely. She described it in a written account sent by post, 3 pages on monastery letterhead, dated April 19th, 2017. The arrangement matched mine in every measurable detail. 11 stems, semicircular fan pattern, stems cut at an angle, white Rosa cultivar. She had not touched them. She had no photograph. But she had noticed something I had not recorded in my own account, because I had not thought to look: the temperature of the floor where the roses rested. She had pressed her palm flat on the stone directly beneath the stems. She said it was noticeably warmer than the surrounding floor. Not dramatically, but measurably. Warm in the way a stone bench is warm after someone has been sitting on it for a long time. I checked my photographs again. I checked the Carroll PCO5 log for December 3rd, 2016. Temperature in the chapel at 5:30 a.m., 16.7 degrees Celsius. No anomaly in the overall room reading. But a point source thermal differential at floor level would not register in the air temperature sensor mounted at 1.8 meters above the floor. It would be invisible to the system. I called Dr. Monti. I described the thermal observation. She was quiet for a moment, and then said, "If the floor was locally warmer, and the roses were fresh, and they were not there when the basilica closed the previous night, then we have a thermal source we cannot account for. A thermal source beneath 11 white roses in a locked chapel at before 6 in the morning, on 2 separate nights, 45 days apart, in a building with an unbroken automated climate record, showing no entry, no disturbance, no anomaly in the air temperature." And I had not yet opened the notebook. I still did not think I was ready. What I could not know, in April 2017, was that the thing that would finally make me ready was coming in 18 months. Not from the basilica, not from the investigation, from a hospital room in Florence at 11:22 p.m. on a night in October 2018, where everything Carlo had told me would arrive, all at once, in the specific and irrefutable language of dates and places and names. Let me tell you how I came to be in that hospital, because it did not happen because I chose it. It happened because a morning in September 2018 began like any other morning, and then, at 8:47, stopped being ordinary in a way I was not expecting. I was on the roof of the north transept. This was a routine assessment, crack progression measurement in the parapet coping stones, something I did twice a year. I had a tape measure, a crack gauge, a clipboard, the kind of morning I had lived 1,000 times. I was leaning forward to measure a crack at the parapet edge, a crack that had opened 3 millimeters since my last measurement in March, which was at the upper edge of the acceptable annual progression range, when the coping stone shifted. These things happen in medieval buildings. Stone moves, mortar fails. The coping stone, approximately 80 centimeters long and 19 kilograms, pivoted outward along a compression fracture I had not detected in the previous assessment, because it ran perpendicular to the face and was invisible from above. I went with it. I caught the iron tie rod anchor at the base of the parapet with my right hand. Old iron, 1960s installation, tested to 600 kilograms, and my body swung outward over the edge of the roof, 22 meters to the piazza below. I held. The anchor held. The stone did not. It fell 22 meters and shattered on the piazza paving in a shower of limestone fragments. A tourist group from Ireland was crossing the piazza at that moment. 17 people, I was told afterward. The stone landed in an empty gap between the group and a parked vehicle. Nobody was struck. I was pulled back by Brother Luca, who had been on the roof with me, and who deserves far more credit than he accepts. My right shoulder was dislocated. My right hand had 4 deep lacerations from the iron anchor, and 2 ribs were cracked. The emergency services took me to Santa Maria Nuova Hospital in Florence. The helicopter landing pad in Perugia was temporarily closed for maintenance, and Florence was the next available trauma center. I arrived by helicopter at Florence at 12:40 p.m. I spent 2 days in surgical recovery. The shoulder was reduced under general anesthesia. The lacerations were closed. The ribs were monitored for pneumothorax, which did not develop. I was moved to a general recovery ward on October 3, 2018. Room 14, Ward 7, Santa Maria Nuova Hospital, Florence. On October 11, 2018, the vigil of the anniversary of Carlo's death, a nurse I had not seen before came to check my IV at 11 p.m. She was efficient and quiet, and she said, as she was adjusting the drip, "There's a young man who's been asking for you. He says he knows you from Assisi." I said there must be some mistake. I knew no young men in Florence. She said he had been specific. He had asked for Brother Matteo, the structural engineer, the one who was tall and who took measurements. She said he was in room 22, 2 doors down, and that he had been brought in 3 days ago. Pancreatic mass, suspected malignancy, pending biopsy. I said I would see him in the morning. She left. I lay in the dark for 20 minutes, thinking about what she had said. A young man who knew my name, my profession, the description, the one who was tall and who took measurements, in a hospital in Florence, on the vigil of Carlo's anniversary. I got out of bed at 11:22 p.m. My ribs protested. My shoulder was in a sling. I walked 2 doors down and pushed open the door of room 22. The room was dimly lit. There was a man in the bed, perhaps 30 years old, slight, dark-haired, an IV in his left arm, the kind of pale that is not illness, but rather the particular pallor of someone who has been told something frightening and not yet decided how to receive it. He looked at me when I came in, and he said, "You're the friar." I said, "Yes." "I was told to find you. I didn't know it would be here." He paused. "Actually, he said it would be. He said the hospital." I sat in the chair beside the bed. My ribs were not happy about it. "Who told you?" "Carlo Acutis," he said. I know how that sounds. His name was Gianluca Ferretti. He was from Brescia. He had been, as a teenager, a student in the same school system in Lombardy where Carlo had studied. Not the same school, but the same federation. They had met once at a diocesan youth event in 2005 when Gianluca was 16 and Carlo was 14. They had spoken for less than 10 minutes, but at the end of that conversation, Carlo had given him a piece of paper, folded, written in Carlo's own hand, and told him to read it in 10 years and to find the friar it described. Gianluca had read it in 2015. He had tried to find me and gotten as far as knowing I was in Assisi, but had not known how to approach a friar he had never met without seeming unhinged. Then, in September 2018, he had received the diagnosis, suspected pancreatic mass, and had been admitted to Santa Maria Nuova, and had been told, by something he described as an interior voice that he had never experienced before or since, that the friar would come to him. He handed me the piece of paper. I unfolded it. It had been folded so many times over 13 years that the crease lines had gone soft. Written in Carlo's Italian, in the slightly cramped but legible hand I recognized from the canonization materials I had studied by then. For Gianluca, in 10 years you will be in a hospital in Florence. Ward 7. A friar named Matteo will come to you. Show him this paper. He will understand what to do next. The diagnosis will change. Do not be afraid. The cross is light when you know who is carrying it with you. Florence, Ward 7, Matteo. I sat in that chair for a long time. Gianluca was watching me. I became aware that my face was doing something I could not control. Not grief, not fear, something that felt more like the sensation of a structure finally bearing the load it was built for. I went back to my room. I opened the drawer of the bedside table. Hospitals provide them, for personal effects. My habit had come with me in the helicopter. In the inner pocket of the habit, where I had put it when I was admitted, was the leather notebook. I had carried it every day for 12 years. The dark brown cover, the embossed cross, worn almost flat. I opened it. The first 30 pages were what I expected. Notes on Eucharistic miracles, dates and locations in Carlo's precise hand, cross-references to sources, scientific data. Exactly what his website contained, but in draft form. Earlier drafts with marginal corrections. Page 31 was different. It was headed, in slightly larger letters, Per Fratello Matteo, for Brother Matteo. There were 4 pages. I will not read all of them, but I will tell you what they contained, because every line of them corresponds to something that had already happened or was happening at that moment in room 14 of Ward 7 of Santa Maria Nuova Hospital in Florence. He described the notebook itself, the cover, the cross, the weight. He described the chapel in Assisi, the incomplete fresco of the Annunciation. He described the roses. He wrote, "On 2 nights in the winter, December and January, after I have come home to Assisi, you will find 11 roses beside me. Do not try to explain them. Just count them." December 3rd, 2016. January 17th, 2017. He described my fall from the roof. He wrote, "You will fall from a high place and be caught. The anchor will hold. The stone will miss the people below. You will be taken to Florence." He had written the word Florence. He wrote, "In the hospital in Florence, on the night before the anniversary of my death, a young man named Gianluca will be waiting for you in room 22. He has a piece of paper I gave him. When you see his paper and then read this, you will understand that the accounting is closed, as I told my mother. Give Gianluca your blessing and tell him the diagnosis will change, because it will." I sat with that for 12 minutes by the clock on the wall. 12 minutes of absolute stillness in a hospital room in Florence at midnight on October 12th, 2018, the anniversary of the death of Carlo Acutis. Then I got up, took my broken ribs and my sling, walked back to room 22, and gave Gianluca Ferretti the blessing he had been waiting for. 3 days later, the biopsy results came back. The mass was benign. A rare pancreatic serous cystadenoma, non-malignant, surgically manageable. The diagnosis had changed. I did not take credit for that. I want to be clear about that. The medicine was done by doctors with instruments and training that far exceeded my structural engineering background. What I can tell you is what Carlo had written. Tell him the diagnosis will change. And what I can tell you is that it did. I have spent the years since October 2018 trying to be useful with what I know. It is harder than it sounds. Knowing something impossible does not make it easy to speak. It makes the opposite problem. You become responsible for saying it accurately, and accuracy is the hardest discipline of all. I testified before the Vatican's Medical Commission in June 2019. 4 hours. The roses, the photographs, the Corel PCO5 logs, Dr. Monti's report, Dr. Brambilla's optical analysis, Sister Chiara's written account, the notebook, Gianluca's paper, the biopsy records. All of it in the permanent canonical record under a reference number I was given at the end of the session, V2190614-R. A Vatican archivist with whom I had corresponded told me several months later that my testimony was the most technically documented account of its type they had received in the modern beatification process era. I do not say that with pride. I say it because the engineering background, the one that kept me distant from faith for so many years, turned out to be exactly the tool Carlo had needed. A witness with calibrated instruments and reference documents is a different kind of witness than one with only feeling. And I think Carlo knew that. I think that is why my name was in his notebook. On October 10th, 2020, Carlo Acutis was beatified in Assisi. Pope Francis presided. I was in the basilica. I stood in the chapel where I had found the roses, and I looked at the glass panel above the tomb, and I thought about a 15-year-old boy in a blue jacket who had shaken my hand with both of his and said he was glad it was me. I still do not fully understand the roses. I want to be honest about that. I have the photographs, I have the botanical report, I have the climate logs, I have Sister Chiara's account. What I do not have is an explanation in any language that my engineering training would have accepted before October 2006. What I have instead is something I did not expect to acquire in 23 years of religious life: a tolerance for the fact that some loads are carried by structures you cannot see. On September 7th, 2025, Pope Leo XIV canonized Carlo Acutis in Rome during the Jubilee. I was there. The piazza was full and the sky was clear. And when the announcement was made, there was a sound from the crowd that I have no technical description for. It was not applause exactly, and it was not a shout. It was something more like the sound a structure makes when it settles into its final form, when all the tension resolves at once and the load finds its resting place. I am 61 years old. I give talks now, to parishes, to university groups, to medical professionals who are quietly wrestling with things they have seen that do not fit in their protocols. I am not an evangelist. I am not a theologian. I am a structural engineer who took vows late and found in the process that precision is not the enemy of wonder. It is, sometimes, the only language wonder will use when it needs to be heard. The leather notebook is in the Canonical Archive in Milan now. Reference D-2006-1010N. I held it for 12 years and opened it in a hospital room in Florence at midnight on the anniversary of Carlo's death, exactly as he had arranged. What I keep is not the notebook. What I keep is the memory of opening it.
The specific sensation of reading words that knew, before I did, who I was going to be. Carlo said the Eucharist was his highway to heaven. He was 15. He had M3 leukemia and a website that cataloged the miracles of God in 42 countries, and a leather notebook full of specific instructions for people he would never see again.
He was afraid of exactly nothing that I could detect in 2 hours of walking through a basilica with him. And he shook my hand with both of his, and he said he was glad it was me. I think about that sometimes. I think about what it means to be glad, to look at something and say, yes, this is what I hoped for. This will be enough. He was glad it was me, and I have spent 18 years trying to be worthy of that gladness. I am not sure I have managed it, but I am still trying. And I think that counts for something, in whatever accounting system is kept in the place Carlo called his home. If this testimony has marked you the way that night in Florence marked me, if something in this story has landed in a place you did not know was open, I want to ask you one thing before you close this video. Subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is carrying a diagnosis, a grief, a doubt they cannot put down. Someone who needs to know that precision and faith are not opposites, that the accounting closes, that the cross is light when you know who is carrying it with you. On this channel, we gather the traces that Carlo left behind him all over the world, in hospital rooms and locked basilicas, and the handwriting of a 15-year-old boy who knew things he had no ordinary means of knowing. And if you want to carry something of this story with you beyond this video, the free novena to Carlo Acutis is in the description, the first link right below this video. Pray it over 9 days. Pray it for Gianluca, if you like. Pray it for yourself. Pray it for whoever came to mind when I opened that notebook. Carlo said the Eucharist was his highway to heaven. The traces of heaven are everywhere. You only have to know how to look.